What are tree crops, and can we really feed the world with them? Pretty good. This method of growing food fights climate change, produces consistent food for generations, reduces labor, and can feed the world's population using less space, and we need it now more than ever. Also known as agroforestry, this is a way of producing food and resources with long-living trees instead of annual crops, which are plants that live only one season and need to be replanted every year. For anyone that's been apple picking, this idea won't sound revolutionary, but tree crops are able to produce staple crops that rival grains in sustainable and regenerative forms of agriculture. Tree crops can be grown in orchards, but also in mixed systems like silvopasture, hedgerows, and food forests. These concepts are not new. Several thousand-year-old walnut and apple forests are still feeding people in Central Asia. Europeans have survived on hills covered in hazelnuts and chestnuts over the course of history. And there are theories that the Amazon rainforest itself is the product of indigenous food forest engineering. But the European settlers that colonized the United States did not carry any food forest technology with them and promptly destroyed the systems that had been created there. While food forest systems are great for feeding a stable population, they did not produce any crops that the colonizers could make a profit off of. The English populace preferred tobacco over bushels of acorns. Thank you very much. So they cut down the forests they found to plant row crops, plants that depleted the soil of nutrients, and when torrential rains came, as they do in the eastern US, the exposed topsoil was washed away. The domesticated crops they planted did nothing to stabilize the soil. So as soon as land was settled, American colonists were in search of land further and further west, violently displacing the people living there and destroying all of the topsoil until we reached that famous moment for American soil, the Dust Bowl. That's when our guy J. Russell Smith comes in, a geographer born in Virginia in 1874. He was distraught about what he saw happening to American farmland. Some of the best topsoil on the planet gone in a matter of years. Gaping ravines, crevasses running through formerly stable farmland. Devastation, and a great reduction in growing capacity for the U.S. farmers. So Smith took it upon himself to study the various ways that people grow crops on uneven terrain that is susceptible to erosion. His answer was not a special method of farming annual crops, but switching entirely to perennial plants, tree crops. Not only is the tree the great engine of production, but its present triumphant agricultural rivals, the grains, are really weaklings, said Smith. He saw how cultures across the globe maintained ancient trees of various types to provide calories for themselves, produce to export, and food for livestock. The subtitle of this book, Tree Crops, A Permanent Agriculture, helped coin the term permaculture, which refers to a method of farming that requires very few inputs and aims to replicate natural processes. His work helped create the field of agroforestry, but looking at the most grown crops in the US today, we obviously still have a ways to go. To understand the benefits of tree crops, we might start by considering the negative effects of tillage-intensive annual grain agriculture. Things like erosion, soil death, carbon loss, nitrates in groundwater, pesticide usage, and dead zones in the oceans. All of these things can be avoided when the crops come from perennial trees. Once trees are established, it's possible to harvest year after year from them with no inputs at all. It's estimated that one chestnut tree can provide half of the carbohydrates needed for a person in a year. Focusing on tree crops allows us to decentralize farms, producing massive quantities of food on city streets in people's backyards, parks, schoolyards, churches. You get the picture. On farms, it would allow for the production of other complementary crops in the understory, or for raising livestock, or planting native species and creating areas for wildlife to thrive. Native food-producing trees are also larval hosts for moths and butterflies, meaning caterpillars are able to safely eat the tree leaves, which means baby birds have food to eat. You wouldn't think that something as simple as a pecan tree could be revolutionary, but they truly have the potential to remake our entire society. There are examples from all parts of the globe, from mulberry and almond forests in Afghanistan, persimmon orchards in China, and the great chestnut forests of North America that spread across the entire eastern seaboard. But today I wanted to go into detail on a lesser-known system that utilizes tree crops, the Spanish Dehesa. Also known as the Montado in Portuguese, this is a massive savanna with large numbers of oaks, beeches, and caribs, while also raising domestic animals and wild game in between the trees. As you can see, this looks like a gorgeous wilderness, but don't be fooled. It's heavily influenced by human beings. People clear the underbrush every few years to ensure that the grassland doesn't become a dense forest. By managing the denseness of the tree cover, they allow the grass to flourish to feed cattle and deer. Caribs are an incredibly nutrient and calorie-dense bean that grow on trees. They can be eaten by humans, but are often used to feed livestock. The trees are very hardy and can be grown without irrigation. Well, I'm going to set this down now. The oak trees are another interesting part of the system. 50% of the world's cork comes from the bark of the cork oaks grown in the Portuguese Montado. They peel the bark off the trees every 10 years, allowing the tree time to recover. Often these oaks will live for 250 years or more. But the acorns of the oaks are another important resource. In the past, people likely ate the acorns themselves. This might be a surprise for some of you, but acorns have been a staple for most of the humans in the northern hemisphere until relatively recently. The pigs of the Dehesa are allowed to forage their own acorns and get fat, producing the famous jamón ibérico. This low-input system can be described as silvopasture, meaning a forested pasture where livestock is raised. This type of agriculture is so valuable that the drawdown includes it as the number 11 most powerful way to combat climate change. And at the heart of the system are tree crops. There are many people working around the globe to make use of tree crops in more impactful ways than simple orchards. Cities across the planet are looking into installing food forests in urban parks. Activists are looking to create their own food forests for resilience and mutual aid. An interesting example of someone who is committed to radicalizing the youth on positivity and solidarity through gardening is the Build Soil Chestnut Project. Founded in 2019 by Jordan Fink, better known as Build Soil on Twitter, their mission is to plant 1 million chestnut trees to help people respond to climate change and repair soil and the ecosystems around them. By planting trees, they're helping to regenerate the soil, create a cooled microclimate, sequester carbon, and provide free food for the communities where they are planted. With 1 million chestnut trees, they would be able to feed 500,000 people at no cost every year. There are chestnut trees in Europe that are 2,000 years old, so getting these trees in the ground now is an investment for several generations. In 2020, they raised and dispersed 10,000 chestnut seedlings. This grassroots effort is teaching thousands about the benefits of tree crops, and you can find a link to their Patreon in the section below. Why don't we see more tree crops? Well, let me ask, do you know what a persimmon is? Did you know you could eat acorns? Have you ever seen a honey locust? A large problem at this point is cultural conditioning. As Smith points out in his book, Americans are slow to adapt to new foods, and when they do, there's usually a high cost associated with such foods. Ever heard of an acai bowl? This is why he recommended using these crops primarily as a way of feeding livestock, which is where the majority of American grain goes anyway. But in addition to this, there are several challenges. The Wikipedia page for tree crops has a pretty big list of the challenges, and most of the reasons are variations of the theme of people just don't know about it. The biggest true drawback is the investment of time compared to annual crops that will have a market-ready crop in 1 to 3 months. The planting of a tree now will produce food in small amounts within 2 years, but only for things like mulberries and chestnuts. 3 to 5 years is when a cutting or a grafted tree might produce decent quantities, but for trees from seed, it can take 7 to 25 years to get fruit. There are ways to speed this up, but starting today, we're still looking at 3 to 5 years before we would be in a place to produce large quantities of food. The trade-off is that many of these crops require no fertilizer, no or very little irrigation, and will produce food not just for one season, but for several generations. It's obvious that tree crops can provide many solutions, and many of those solutions don't fit in a global economic system that's focused on profit over efficiency, beauty, or protection of the natural world around us. We can and must demand a better system that works for us, but we can also start now by planting tree crops on our own. Which brings us to our call to action. As the proverb goes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Getting as many food trees in the ground is one of the best ways that people can guarantee quality food for their neighborhood while benefiting the climate and local ecosystem. Planting a tree in an appropriate area will also aid in carbon sequestration at a small scale. Planting an oak provides the best bang for your buck on environmental services as well as food production due to them hosting over 500 species of caterpillars. Or you could plant a honey locust and receive hundreds of pounds of sweet, carb-rich fiber at your doorstep yearly. There's a link below to help you identify native trees for your zip code. We can create a better, weirder future. Sometimes it starts with planting a tree.